week 3 of the story. If you are newer around here, you should know that we are on a journey, 31 weeks through the large narrative arc of the Bible, the scriptures, the story that God is telling, has been telling since the dawn of time. If you don't yet have a copy of the story, you ought to know that we have a space out there in the lobby. We'd love to gift you a free copy of this story, as well as there's all kinds of resources out there that you can use that will be impactful. I pray for you on this journey together. The question, the conversation you just had together, which, by the way, it was awful fun to watch that from up here. I'm not great at lip reading, but I'm pretty sure I saw the word Hawaii mouthed a couple of times there. If you were to ask me my favorite vacation spot, I've never been to Hawaii. I cannot speak authoritatively on that, but I probably wouldn't choose the beach. Personally, I like the mountains, or at least some foothills. I like to spend some time doing adventure on my vacations, and I was on that type of a trip, the story I want to tell you right now. There's a moment. Every hunter knows this moment. You have a plan, you've built a plan. There's a plan you trusted, a plan you were sure was going to work, and then it suddenly falls apart. So I'm on an elk hunt. Honestly, I wasn't even planning to chase elk that day. I had something else dialed in. You guys, I saw a giant, like a Mondo trophy white-tailed deer. And so I did what any reasonable person would do. I had seen him twice, same trail, same pattern. 30 minutes before sunset, 30 minutes after sunrise. I did what any reasonable person would do. I bought a deer tag. I mean, it was textbook. In my mind, this is going to be the story. This is the plan. This is how it's supposed to go. But that night, everything changed. I'm out there. I'm in position. I'm on the ground. I'm kind of brushed in. I'm waiting on that particular deer. But instead, well, I ended up with an elk. It wasn't what I planned. It wasn't what I set up for that evening. It wasn't the story that I had in my head, but it happened. I'll spare you the gory details. The next night, I'm back in the same spot. I'm thinking, okay, back to the plan, back to this trophy deer. But what I walked into was something completely different. Now, I don't want to be gross on a Sunday morning, but because of the elk the night before, there was kind of a mess on the mountainside. And suddenly, I realized, you know that feeling when you just kind of know I'm not alone? I had that moment. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by bears. I started counting, like 10 of them. I have it on video. I could prove it if I need to. At one point, I realized I was actually between Mama Bear and one of her 3 cubs. Mama Bear's in the room. You know that's not the spot you want to be. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about deer anymore. I wasn't thinking about strategy. I wasn't thinking about success. What was I thinking? This is what I was thinking. This is not how I thought this was going to go. In my brain, this is not how I pictured this moment. Maybe you've never been on a mountainside surrounded by 10 bears. I hope you haven't. But if I could switch this from this direction, let's get serious, not talk about something trivial, but could we talk about the hard stuff of life for a minute? Because I bet you've had that moment, you know, the moment I'm talking about, when life didn't follow the plan that you had in your brain of how it was supposed to go. Maybe I'm talking for you about a death of a loved one. Maybe I'm talking about a loss, something meaningful to you, like maybe a job, Maybe for you, I'm talking about a dramatic detour from your hopes and the dreams that you have in your heart, where what you expected and what you actually experienced, well, those two things do not match up. And you find yourself asking the question, God, what in the world are you doing? Maybe the question isn't so much what, maybe the question is why? Why, God? Why this thing? Why now? But while we're at it, why me? If you could resonate with any of those questions, I want to encourage you to lean in today, week 3 of the story. I want to talk about Joseph's story. I'm in Genesis chapter 37. If you've got a Bible with you, or if you don't have one, reach up underneath the seat in front of you and pull that Bible out. Genesis chapter 37, we're going to look at some snapshots along the way in Joseph's story. Here's the big idea we're going to try to wrap our minds around. Here it is. God is working in ways you can't see. Oftentimes in moments you don't understand. We've been talking through this whole series about the lower story, the way we experience things, the upper story, the bigger picture that God is telling. What we see, what we feel, what doesn't make sense. Come on, that's the lower story. The title of this message is this: Trusting God When Life Falls Apart. By the way, Joseph, Old Testament Joseph, end of Genesis, Joseph, he has something to say about this. Joseph's story is for anyone who's ever lived in that gap between what you thought God was doing and what you actually ended up experiencing. Last week we talked about Abraham, Father Abraham. We stood with Abraham. We discovered some truths about his life, like God makes a promise. That great commission of the Old Testament moment, Genesis chapter 12. He says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. We learned that God uses the unlikely. We learned that faith walks before it sees. We learned that sometimes nothing makes sense. And then we learned, most importantly, that God provides what you can't. And we asked this question last week, do you? Do you trust God when your story doesn't make sense? This week, we step into a story that answers that specific question. Because Abraham shows us how to start walking by faith, Joseph shows us how to keep walking even when life falls apart. Because as we're going to discover, it's one thing to trust God at the beginning. It's another thing to trust him when everything unravels. So Abraham, there's a jump in the story here to Joseph. Last week we discovered God makes a promise to Father Abraham. I'm going to give you land. I'm going to make you into a nation. You're going to be a blessing to all nations. And then the last line of that promise in Genesis chapter 3, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you, which, as we discovered last week, is messianic foreshadowing. He's talking about Jesus. Jesus is coming in the line of your descendants. But how do you turn a family, Father Abraham, into a nation when famine is coming? It very well could have been a global famine. It was at least largely regional. We step into Joseph's story. By the way, could I foreshadow just a little bit what you're getting ready to read in the next few weeks? We're going to discover God is building a nation through Father Abraham. There's 12 tribes to the nation of Israel. One of them, well, is Joseph, except he has 2 sons. He has Ephraim and Manasseh. They're actually 2 half-tribes. They represent a split of Joseph's double inheritance. Why does Joseph get a double inheritance? Oh, because of the story we're getting ready to read. In Joseph's lower story, we learn how to trust God when nothing goes as planned. And it doesn't. 4 snapshots from Joseph's life. The first one, we get to look at him in the pit. In a moment of severe betrayal that he walks into, he lives through. Maybe you can relate to that. I mean, you might be in that place right now where you're thinking, this isn't the deer I had hoped for. This is a mountain with bears. Joseph, he starts with a dream. He's 17 years old. God gives him a glimpse of something much grander, much bigger. His story begins with a dream. Genesis chapter 37, verse 5. Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers, they hated him all the more. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. Several of us got together yesterday to celebrate my grandson's first birthday. You get together with your siblings. Well, if you grew up in a family, you get sibling rivalry. Sometimes we used strong language like, I hate you. These guys meant it. He said to them, he didn't help matters here. Listen to this dream I had. My brothers, you guys, we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose, this is his dream, and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. That doesn't go over well in sibling rivalry, does it? But before the dream could become a reality, his life actually collapses in on itself. Look at his brother's response. They said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? He's the little brother, by the way. Big brother has something to say about this. And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. The plot thickens. Skip ahead to verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. His robe has significance. Why? Because Daddy had given it to him. He might have been Daddy's favorite. This becomes a problem. I think it's why his brothers hated him to begin with. The ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him into the cistern when sibling rivalry goes incredibly bad. I love the details in Scripture. The cistern was empty because there was no water in it. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but he's thrown into a pit. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. The plot thickens. Oh, Egypt, another nation, a foreign land. Judah, big brother, said to his other brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? They've been plotting to kill him. Come, let's sell him then instead to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed to reason. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites and took him to Egypt. Egypt. His brothers hate him. They strip him of his robe, they throw him into a pit, they sell him into slavery to Egypt. And just like that, his dream turns into a nightmare. The place that God showed him now has to feel impossible to reach. You ever been there? I remember when I was 17, much like Joseph in this story. I thought I had a God-given dream. I felt like I wanted to be a doctor. My mom had terminal cancer. Doesn't take a psychologist to figure out what probably was going on in my brain during that season of my life. Mom died. I blinked. It's now February of my senior year of high school. I'd missed some important deadlines for college scholarships. I saw that dream leaving. 17 years old. Maybe you've been there. Have you ever had a moment in your life where your life didn't match the story that you actually thought God was writing? Maybe it's a job that falls through. Maybe it's a relationship that breaks up. Maybe it's a diagnosis that comes. Maybe it's just a simple door that closes and you're left asking God, well, this isn't what I thought. I had a dream, you understand. Here's the tension. We don't struggle when life is unclear. We struggle when life contradicts what we thought God said. This line's going to come back a few times in this message. Hear me. Just because God is silent, it doesn't mean he's absent. God's silence is not his absence. Have you ever hiked switchbacks before? Speaking of family vacations you'd like to take, travel trips you'd like to plan, let me see your hands if you've ever been to Bryce Canyon. Oh my goodness, if you've never been, put it on your list. I have never seen color temperatures like I saw in Bryce Canyon. It is absolutely stunning. It's gorgeous in southern Utah. It's right around the corner from Zion National Park. Put it on your list. We took our kids there. They were tiny, like just little guys and little girl. To be honest, we took them on a hike, a rim-to-rim hike that probably was a little bit above their pay grade, might have been setting us up for a little bit of frustration. Can I show you the pretty pictures first? These are fun. Look at this. Here's big brother and little brother, arms around each other, posing for the picture. We start hiking. We're hiking into the distance. These are called hoodoos. Absolutely gorgeous, but they have switchbacks in them. Here's the next picture. We found a hiking stick. We're off on our jolly, merry way. And then we get to the switchbacks. You ever been there? Now, we're all pretty posed up in this picture, but somewhere right about here, well, it got a little bit ugly. The sweat started to come out. The frustration started to leak. I played around a little bit with AI this past week. I put in a prompt. It's amazing how quick and simple this happens. Can I show you an image? Speaking of switchbacks, I oftentimes in life feel like I'm this guy right here. I can't see the path. I'm worried about what's right around that corner. It's a blind corner. I can't see what's there. That's my perspective, the lower story. God's perspective, he's able to get back a little bit further. He can see not just the path, but the ultimate destination. From the ground, lower story, man, life sometimes feels confusing. Walking back and forth, no clear direction. But from above, it's not confusing at all. Every turn is taking you somewhere. Every step is getting you closer to a destination. Somewhere along the way, you get the opportunity to realize that there is a path, there's a plan, there's a destination. The difference between these two views is the difference between your story and God's story. Scripture actually names this tension. If you were to look in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, right after the verses that hippie song in the 60s was quoting, for every season, turn, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. Right after that, look at this truth. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. He, God, has made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end because they're stuck in their lower story. They can't see their life from the perspective of their Creator. God's doing something beautiful, but we can't see the whole picture. He's writing a story. We can't read every chapter. He's working from beginning to end, and you and I, we're living somewhere in the middle. There's a gap between the lower story and the upper story. In Joseph's lower story, everything looks like it's falling apart. But in God's upper story, come on, everything is just beginning to fall into place. Let's look at another snapshot. In Joseph's lower story, we learn how to trust God when nothing goes as planned. He was thrown into the pit, betrayed. Now we're moving to the house where he wrestles with temptation. By the way, these are different locations, But the same question is being asked. Can I trust God here? Can I trust God here? Sometimes the question isn't just what is God doing, but how do I stay faithful even when this isn't what I planned? So Joseph ends up in Egypt. He's in Potiphar's house. For a moment, things improve. God is with him. He gains responsibility. He earns trust. And then comes the test. I'm in Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph. Pay attention to that phrase. It shows up again and again. So that he prospered, and he lived in the land of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Good stuff. Up and to the right trajectory, right? Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Oh my goodness, the dream might be coming to fruition. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he had owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. That's good for his resume. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Then the plot thickens. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Listen, if you get written into the Bible, isn't that a pretty cool description that you once said about you? After a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph. Uh-oh. The music swells, it changes a little bit in the movie. She said, "Come to bed with me," but he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, and for good reason, because you're his wife." He has temptation. He has opportunity. She's willing. He actually has control. He's in a power position, is he not? I love what Joseph answers ultimately to this temptation. Look at verse 9. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against Potiphar? Sin against his wife? Sin against himself? No, I can't sin against my God." When life disappoints us, sometimes we're tempted to begin to negotiate our convictions, right? You ever been there? You start asking questions that you never used to ask, like, is this really that big of a deal? Does this thing really matter in the long term? This temptation. Or maybe the worst one, after everything I've been through, don't I actually deserve this? But Joseph shows us faith isn't just how you start, it's how you stay faithful when you don't think anybody else is watching, because you, like Joseph, know God's watching. Joseph actually does the right thing. He runs. He flees from temptation, and then it's a happily ever after story, right? No. He did the right thing, and it actually cost him. He's falsely accused of doing something he didn't do. What do we say? Just because God is silent doesn't mean he's absent. God's silence is not his absence. Let's learn from Joseph's lower story how to trust God when nothing goes as planned. In the pit, in the house, in the prison. Again, same question, different locations. Can I trust God here? Can I trust God here? Oh, how about here? Can I trust God in the prison? Joseph is falsely accused. He's thrown into prison. Some of you are here, and if you're honest, you'd say, this isn't what I planned. But might I suggest, it might be what God is doing to use your story for his glory, for his purpose. Genesis chapter 39, verse 20. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison. Not just any prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. I bet this was a solid place that you couldn't escape from. While Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. Oh, that's good. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. Are you seeing a trajectory in his life? We've seen this story before. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. There's another character here in the story. He's actually the chief cupbearer to the king. We know him as Pharaoh over all of Egypt. He's thrown into prison. He has a dream. Remember, Joseph has some expertise and experience with dreams. He interprets the dream for the cupbearer, and he says, before he's released, hey, remember me when you're out there in the world. I didn't do the thing I've been accused of. Would you help me get out of here? Exonerate me. He didn't. Look at verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph and actually maybe actively forgot him. Not for a moment, but actually for years. Can you imagine years of silence, years of waiting, years of feeling forgotten, no update, no progress, no explanation? But the scripture keeps saying over and over again, the Lord was with Joseph. Which begs a question. If God was with him, why in the world is he still stuck in prison? Good question. Because God's presence doesn't always mean immediate progress. From our perspective in the lower story, we want that, right? Sometimes it means sustained purpose, even in a difficult place. Like for Joseph in prison. Because sometimes God will let you sit in a place that doesn't match what he promised so that he can develop something in you that you're going to need later. I had a conversation this past week with somebody in our church. Honestly, since that conversation, I can't stop thinking about what he said. He has been walking through more than what most of us could imagine, serving several generations in his family, carrying pain that's not going away. And he said this to me. He said, how much energy gets wasted on the why questions? This was profound. Questions like, why did this happen? Why didn't God stop it? Why this timing? Or maybe the good old-fashioned, why me, God? And then he said, what if we took that same energy and we took the why questions and we put it toward the what? What is God asking of me right now? What step of faith can I take today? What would courage look like in this moment? And while he was talking, I couldn't help but think about Joseph. I was reading chapter 3 just like you were this past week. Joseph doesn't spend his life asking why, he just keeps asking what. What does faithfulness look like here in this circumstance that you have me in today, God? Because why keeps you stuck in the past, doesn't it? But the what, it has the power to move you forward with God. In the pit, he didn't get answers. In the house, he didn't get clarity. In the prison, he doesn't get explanations. But in every place, he chose faithfulness. The Lord was with him. Some of you are here right now. You're doing the right things. It still isn't working. You're praying and it feels silent. You're asking, where is God? Where is he in my circumstance, in the pit, in the house, in the prison? Could I encourage you to stop asking the why am I here? Start asking what does faithfulness look like even here. Because just because God is silent, it doesn't mean he's absent. This week, when you feel yourself asking why, just pause and replace it with, God, what? What are you inviting me into right now? Because he's where he's always been, present, working, writing your story. In Joseph's lower story, we learn how to trust God even when nothing goes as planned. The pit, the house, the prison, and then in a moment, he's elevated to the palace. In a moment, everything changes. After years of nothing, everything changes. Pharaoh has a dream. Joseph is remembered. He's brought out of prison. Different locations, same question, right? Can I trust God here? Can I trust God here? Can I trust God here? How about in success? Can I trust God here? Can God trust me there? Don't miss this. In a single day, he goes from prisoner to second in command over all of Egypt. Here's what the text says. Genesis 41, verse 14. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. He's had a dream. He was quickly brought from the dungeon. When Joseph, had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. You got to get dressed up to go before power. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I love this. He gives credit to God. I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. But God. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. Look at what happens in verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, and there's no one so discerning and wise as you will be put in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I'll hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. He's in the right place at the right time, right? Coincidence or providence? Remember, there's a lower story. There's an upper story. I had a little fun with AI this past week. It's amazing what you can do with just a little prompt. The upper story, the lower story. You could look at this and say, well, right place, right time, right? Coincidence, luck. But from Joseph's perspective, it had to feel like a moment. From God's perspective, it's a movement. From Joseph's perspective, it's all sudden. From God's perspective, it's been unfolding all along. Let me say that again. From God's perspective, he's had a plan and he's had a purpose. God has been positioning, he's been preparing, he's been orchestrating this long before Joseph ever stood in that palace. Look at the difference between the perspective of those two images. On the bottom, it's what Joseph sees. He's in it. He's surrounded by it. He's managing what's just right in front of him. That's the lower story. But on the top, that's what God sees. The entire Nile River Valley. God sees a coming famine. God sees the positioning of a man in the exact place at the exact time. That's the upper story. Same moment, two completely different perspectives. And this is important. Don't miss this. The same God who was with Joseph in the pit is the same God that raised him to the palace. Suddenly, everything that didn't make sense starts to make sense. The pit, the house, the prison, nothing was wasted. Hear me, God can do in a moment what you couldn't do in a lifetime. And as we unpack the story together, we're going to see that over and over and over again. In Joseph's lower story, it looked like setback after setback. In God's upper story, it was all preparation. Every story has a turning point. If you were a movie director, you would call it the climax moment of the film. Listen, the climax moment of this particular story, Joseph's story, this is Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. There's a global famine coming, remember? Joseph's brothers, the same ones that threw him into the pit, they show up to Egypt. Their brother, they don't recognize him, is now second in command. He's been put in charge of making all the preparations for the distribution of the grain that they've been storing the last 7 years to prepare for this moment. Remember, God has a story, an upper story, plan and a purpose. His brothers don't recognize Joseph, but he recognizes them. There's a moment where the inevitable confrontation comes. The last time they saw him, the last time he saw them, they just thrown him into the pit and sold him into slavery. He's got food to save them from starvation. And they're kind of comparing their notes. Look at verse 20, the last chapter of the book of Genesis. You, my brothers, intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Same event, two different intentions. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. Now listen, God didn't cause the evil. He didn't cause it, but he redeemed it. God didn't waste it. He repurposed it. Only God can take what was meant to break you and use it to build something through you. In God's story, setback is never the final sentence. What do we keep saying? Because God is silent? That doesn't mean he's absent. There's a connection to this thought in the New Testament in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. God's upper story. Does your lower story match up with his? Are you following where he has planned, where he has purposed? Joseph saved people from famine. The context of that verse, listen, Jesus saves us from sin. Joseph preserved life. Jesus gives eternal life. Joseph was betrayed. Jesus was betrayed. Joseph suffered unjustly. Jesus suffered unjustly. We just looked at that a few weeks ago at Easter. But where Joseph saved a nation, Jesus saves the world. He didn't just do that then. He's still doing it now through your story. And the cross proves this truth. God can take the worst moment in history and turn it into the greatest victory. What looked like defeat in the lower story was victory in the upper story. So where are you at right now? In the pit? In the house? Are you in prison? In these moments, the temptation is to believe this is the end. This is just how my story goes, but it's not. God's still working. God's still building. God is still writing. What you see as an ending, God might be using actually as a transition in your story. Joseph didn't get the story he expected. He got the story God was writing. Maybe that's where you are today. You thought you were hunting deer. Now you're standing on a mountain surrounded by things you didn't expect, and I'm not talking about bears. And you're asking, God, why? Why are you doing this? And if you're honest, most of us live there, stuck in the why. Why did this happen? Why didn't it work out? Why didn't God show up the way I thought he would? Listen, those are real and honest questions, but they're also exhausting questions. The why keeps us looking backward. You can't move forward when you're staring behind you. But what if you started asking a different question? Instead of why, God, what about what now, God? God, what are you doing? What does faith look like here today? What step of obedience is right in front of me today? What would trust look like in this moment? That's what Joseph did. He didn't get all his why questions answered, but he kept saying yes to the next what. And over time, God turned his obedience into something bigger than he could have ever seen, even in his wildest dreams. Joseph would tell you God is doing more than you can see, even in the pit, in the house, in the prison. Your story isn't finished yet. God is present. God is working. God is writing. And what did we say? Just because God is silent doesn't mean he's absent. You thought you were hunting one thing, but God's doing something else all along. Some of you, you're in the pit, or you're in the prison. You're wondering where God is. Well, he's right there where he was with Joseph. He's present. He's working. He's writing. Maybe today your step isn't figuring out the why. Maybe your step is surrendering the why and asking God, what? What are you inviting me into right now? Because for some of us, our next step isn't clarity. Hear me. It's trust. It's saying, God, I don't understand this story, but I'm still willing to follow you in it. What's that look like for you today? Is it an action step of receiving his grace, his mercy? Maybe you've never done that. Maybe it's returning to community, connecting in the larger story that God is telling with God's people. Maybe it's just starting to engage in his story, reading your Bible, diving into this story with us together. Listen, if you're here today and you're tired of carrying the weight of why, this right here is a moment to lay it down. If you want to take that step, our prayer room is open now through the end of the service and after the service. Don't walk out today carrying what God already paid for you. Would you stand up with me? Our action steps this week, well, read chapter 4 of the story. We're not just learning about Joseph. We're learning how to trust God when life falls apart. We're learning even when you don't understand the story, you can still trust the author. When you don't understand the why, well, maybe just take the next step into what. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we don't understand everything, but we trust you. Would you help us release the why so we can take the next what? Would you give us courage to follow you one step at a time? We trust you with our story. Amen.